Hey, look out. It's Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, when you wind this guy up, his what he does is he talks about evangelism, and it continues. Don Everetts here. He is the writer for the Lutheran Hour and author. He's got a new book. It's called Hopeful Neighbor: What Happens When Christians Pursue the Common Good. Don, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing well. Thank you.
We're doing great.
Okay.
I looked at your list, the list of books. This is not your first book, obviously, because I'm about to talk about some of your other books. But it seems like you default, in a good sense, to evangelism. Why is that?
Yeah, it's not because I felt naturally called to it necessarily, but it was just God's movement. I cut my teeth in ministry by spending 14 years doing campus ministry, college ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And I started that in Boulder, Colorado. And that's a place where Buddhism's the largest religion. It's a very, I was running into all sorts of non-Christians and normal people who didn't follow Jesus and had to early in my life navigate that. So that really shaped me. And, got a passion not only for talking with normal people about Jesus, but also helping Christians try to do the same. So it's felt like a call that God has kind of blossomed over time.
In 14 years of campus ministry, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I'm sure you had all types of questions. How did those questions change? Did some of them get harder? And then what did you do? Say, hey, wait a minute, I got to find out. I'll be back. What did you do?
You know what the biggest thing was, as I got to know more people who it's not that they knew Christianity and rejected it, but they didn't really know it. And that was kind of new. And so actually the biggest struggle was figuring out, how do I talk about the things they're asking about, Jesus, the Bible, prayer, church, etc., in a way that isn't cliche, in a way that uses language they understand. That was like the biggest barrier for me. It wasn't like really tricky apologetics questions, although those do come up and you have to figure out, how to answer those.
Yeah.
I felt like the bigger challenge, the bigger barrier was having to learn new language that wasn't laden with theological or Christian language that actually doesn't communicate very well.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of just reflecting, journaling, having to re-examine my own faith with a fresh lens of, how do I talk about my relationship with God using normal words? And that's been a really refreshing process, and it helped me answer people's questions better.
That's so good.
So let's flash forward now to now, and let's talk about the Hopeful Neighborhood Project, the project and the book, of course. Which came first, the project or the book?
Project. So it's I'm kind of doing this research with the Barna Group on how do Christians relate with their neighborhoods? How do they relate with the people in place right around where they live? And that research was really exciting and really sobering. And that kind of spawned, out of the research, spawned both a book to help people confront what the Bible says, what God has to say to us about how he calls us to relate with the people in place right around where we live. The book also causes us to confront church history, which shows us that really for 2,000 years, a hallmark of Christianity has been that Christians are people who pursue the common good right where they live. And then the research forces us to admit the fact that maybe we're not doing that as much as we used to.
Yeah.
So the book was kind of to help people kind of wrestle with those things. And then the whole Hopeful Neighborhood Project is the launching of a nationwide network of Christians who are saying, I want to reclaim this core biblical call to pursue the common good of the people in place right around me. So the project is kind of an outworking of what we've been learning.
Don, I'm going to throw you a softball. How do you begin? You wave at your neighbor. You talk about in Atlanta, talk about the Braves. We never talk about the Falcons. And then how do you segue into, hey, I want to tell you a little bit more about how Jesus. What are the steps?
Yeah, great question. I mean, for most people, it starts with getting to know their neighbors, just getting to know them. Just start there. Most of us are what they call living above place, and that means I'm living my life kind of as a commuter without any meaningful interaction with the people I live right around. So step one is start having interactions with the people right around you. Start to get to know them. And really, our other research on spiritual conversations has revealed that you have to gain a hearing before you can give good news. And so you gain a hearing just by chatting about everyday things, including bad sports teams. And you gain a hearing by chatting, but also by relating with people's joys and pains of life. That process of building trust, of building bridges in our postmodern age, even though you're not talking about any gospel content yet, just that process of gaining a hearing and building trust is an evangelistic activity. And then as the Spirit moves, that can move into sharing conversations where you share something Jesus is doing in your life, connecting Jesus to everyday issues, and then eventually to actually helping people answer their questions, etc. But for most of us, it begins in a really basic, simple place, getting to know the people around us and starting to gain a hearing by building trust with them.
You know, it's weird because it seems like it's almost become foreign to get to know your neighbors. I mean, back in the day, you knew
Yeah.
all your neighbors, they knew you, they knew your business. Now, I mean, I know a couple of my neighbors, but most of them I don't know who they are or what their interests are. Why have we gotten this way, Don?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sociologists point to a lot of changes after World War II. So it's a number of factors. Some of it is architecture. We started putting porches on the back of houses instead of the front of houses. Some of it is technology. Air conditioning and television came at the same time we were putting porches on the back. So we started living inside of our houses more. You can look at the Highway Act and how it created the experiment of the suburbs and commuting to places. We started designing a life geared around driving places rather than walking, or living within kind of what they call a pedestrian shed where people can kind of walk to. So there's a lot of external things that have made it such that we have deeper relationships with people who live miles and miles and miles away. And maybe we've lived next door to someone for 20 years and we actually don't know their names. Maybe we wave, but we don't actually know their names. So
Right.
Rural, suburban, urban, they all have different barriers, but a lot has shifted in the last 50 years. And so Christians need to, if we're going to respond to the call to love our neighbors and to pursue the common good of our neighborhoods, we're going to have to kind of be countercultural and start to get to know people who live around us.
Yeah.
Don Everetts, author of a new book, Hopeful Neighbor, and we'll pop up the website here in a second. We got to take a break, and just a few. HopefulNeighbor.org is the place to go to. Don, is that demographic sensitive, or does that cross the board? I mean, us older folks, I think we kind of get settled in our ways, and we do have the television, we do have the AC, obviously. Fortunately for us, we have a porch on the front. But like my oldest son is 31, and he lives in the city, and they seem to be more crunched together, and they seem to relate easier than we do. Is that the case or no?
Our research didn't show any meaningful differences between age demographics in terms of how people relate with their neighborhoods and all that. Although there are phases of life, right? I mean, so there are phases of life where you're more open to new relationships, and then there are phases of life where you kind of are set in relationships. So the research doesn't point to any significant demographic differences, but I would say that there are seasons of life, absolutely, seasons that create different barriers or incentives for us to get to know people in our neighborhoods. So, for example, having kids, you can get to know neighbors because your kids are out playing and they have kids, and so your kids play together. When people have new pets and they're out walking their pets, that also is kind of a catalyst for getting to know your neighbors as well. So there are details of life, and I can say as a card-carrying introvert that there are also temperamental reasons why as an introvert who's been a pastor for 12 years, sometimes when I get home, I'm like relationally tapped. And so there are some personal dynamics like that as well that, we have to be real about, but are important for us to navigate.
Card-carrying member of the introvert club. My wife has one of those cards.
There we go.
I guess I need to stop yelling at the kids in the yard saying, "Hey, get off my lawn, kid."
Yeah, that probably doesn't
that would
help
work better. Don Everett's new book, Hopeful Neighbor. All right, one thing before we go to a break you want folks to get out of. What's the main thing, Don?
I would say the main thing is that when Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," for people to consider that maybe that also includes our literal neighbors, and that our faithfulness and our vibrancy as Christians may be connected to us being countercultural and actually engaging with the people in place right around us. There's a beauty that is yet to be tapped into that in our divisive age is frankly really hopeful.
Love it.
There you go.
Don
HopefulNeighborhood.org.
Yeah. Great website. We got to take a break, read the book, and not only read it, let's step out and actually do something. Thanks, Don, for the inspiration. We appreciate you. I'd love to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
We'll be right back. I'm Nick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.